This is the Ready Set Podcast, and here's your host, me, Joe Persinger.
Hey, how was your week, you fucks? We are packed today. Packed! Moving truck packed. Packed like you're fleeing your fiance's apartment in the dead of the night. When you quietly turn off into the alley, all of a sudden she appears out of nowhere, under the streetlights in that pre-Civil War era long nightie she won't let go of. You hit the gas, but she jumps like a mutant onto the side of the truck, inching closer and closer to the side step next to your driver's side door. The tears roll down your eye as her shadow passes over your face. You brake the truck slowly. You don't want to injure her, because you're resigned to your fate. You're moving back in with her, and going through with that full destination wedding. When her face lurches from the shadows into the inner cab of the truck, you could smell the tuna melts from the night before. Or at least that's what you tell yourself. She reminds you that you left your backpack before disappearing into that old retro Trans Am with your old best friend Greg. Yeah, folks, we're that fucking packed today. Speaking of being packed, in the metaphorical sardine can, another passenger is strained trying to open a door mid-flight. Seriously, this happened. A tranny booted from a weightlifting competition? Joe rants. $803 for a pound of coffee? A 900-pound man has to be transported to court? We've got an update on the college scandal, and another Chinese citizen is jailed without a trial. All this and more, plus the staff report. Brought to you this week by Joe's Sports Corner. This is your one-stop shop current events and politics podcast. If society was a joke, we're just here for the first set. Are you
Ready Set Podcast!
Okay, so before we dive into this, where the hell am I here? Before we dive into this thick, packed porterhouse of a podcast, just want to say, please like our new Ready Set Podcast Facebook page and leave a comment about your mythical host and my brilliant ideas. Please. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on, that's right, Apple Podcasts, our new platform. Don't forget about Mixcloud, Spreaker, and YouTube. And please post a comment, give the podcast a thumbs up, and hit the bell to be notified when the podcast is posted to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter at ReadySetPodcast, which is ReadySetPodcast, or email the podcast at ReadySetPodcast@gmail.com. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, from the Daily Wire this week, we have a Mary Gregory and the Powerlifting Federation kind of butting heads. So Mrs. Mary Gregory, or Ms., whatever, was stripped of several championship titles: the squat, the bench press, the deadlift, and a Masters world record for her powerlifting scores across the board. So basically, I guess there's a record for her scores all being put together. So that would bring her up to 1, 2, 3, about 4 records in total. Wow! So the Powerlifting Federation determined that she was not eligible to compete as a female. Well, why was that be? What could possibly be the situation here? It's a tranny. Yes, you have a man what's the fucking word they use? Transitioning to being a female competing in a powerlifting competition. I'll give you guys a few seconds. Just let that permeate in your brain for a minute. A male transitioning to a female competing in a weightlifting competition. I'll wait. So the quote from the Powerlifting Federation was, quote, It was revealed that this female lifter was actually a male in the process of becoming a transgender female, Federation President Paul Bossi said in a statement to the media. I'm reading from the Daily Wire, by the way. Our rules and the basis of separating genders for competition are based on physiological classification rather than identification. On the basis of all information presented to the board of directors for this particular case, the conclusion is that the correct physiological classification is male. So apparently all this information was attained via a urine sample and a birth certificate. Find that extremely interesting. So that begs the question. I wonder what's easier, removing a 23-year-old tranny out of a weightlifting competition, or a late 90s Mazda Miata. Well, I got a few more. If two trannies of the same sex or different sex... Wait, what? Well, now I'm lost in my own verbiage. I don't... Dude, guy, what? Anyway, I get so confused here. A male tranny is a biological woman? I'll just call that a Ford. Like I said, I got a few more here. If two trannies hook up and they both manually stimulate each other, which one's a clutch? Who shifts the gears? We need answers. But what if it's an automatic tranny? Do you just adjust the shaft into a certain spot and hit the gas? Don't ask me what the gas would be in that situation. Maybe it's an energy drink? No idea. I'll tell you what's a mind-blowing experience. Watching a tranny shift gears on another tranny while driving a manual Ford Fiesta. See what I did there? Well, a third party changes the tranny fluid. That's a party. Or one hell of an orgy. Or maybe it's just a bunch of guys working on a car. Wow! I'll tell you one thing. There's a lot of division within the tranny community. But that's a whole nother podcast. Anyway, plowing ahead here. Let me turn up get some volume going here. So have you ever wanted to own nunchucks legally, that is? Thinking of owning your own chapter of a Cobra Kai dojo? I know Klaus is. Were you thinking of adding nunchucks to your list of weapons to hide from the government? Looking at you, Ken Carangello. Well, you're in luck. The state of Arizona just removed the sticks and chain from the deadly weapons list. And trust me, folks, I know the struggle. They added me to that list back in 2012, and I had to move back to Chicago. Ken's been trying to get on that list since 94, but that KO I gave him back in 96 reduced his eligibility. Sean Sample, a karate instructor, I think he's Team Miyagi-Do, although I could not confirm this, said it's good to know nobody's going to get arrested for carrying their nunchucks to training. He also observed that the ban made little sense in a state where open carry of a firearm is legal, and I know what the hell he's talking about. I was at a gas station once. I think I just moved there in Phoenix. Just pumping gas. The guy across the way from me literally has a gun sitting on his hip. Trust me, you'd think twice about fucking around when you know people either have a gun on their hip or in their shirt pocket. And I will say, Mr. Sean Sample, possibly a Miyagi-Do karate chapter person or Team Miyagi-Do, he's got a point here. But he sounds a little bit like a Democrat. You should work on that, Sensei. Wax on, wax off, motherfucker. I'm just kidding. He sounds like a good dude and a Republican. But you know these lefties would be like, no way, man. Sorry for blowing your ears out there. No way, man. Those wooden sticks are appropriating a culture of stereotypes, man. Fucking hippies. Shut up and let them use their fucking sticks and chains. Mind your own fucking business. All right. So, we got a few updates here for you. We've been following the college scandal update. I'm an idiot. We've been following the college scandal, and here is the update. Felicity Huffman is pleading guilty. Apparently, 4 months and $20,000 fine was recommended by the prosecution, and the judge will sentence the actress on September 13th. Interesting facts about her plea deal here. She can't own a firearm or ammunition. I mean, shouldn't be a problem. She's a lefty who lives in California. She can't run for office or appeal any prison time up to 20 years. I mean, this is like sentencing or I wouldn't say sentencing because she's not being sentenced, but this is like, making a deal with a child predator to give him community service at a daycare center. You really showed her U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston. Now, speaking of inept government administrations or government office administrations, have you ever thought, I'm going to name my dog Pig and Bacon? Have you ever thought, I better not put this on the internet? Of course you didn't. You have a First Amendment right. Are you wondering what would happen if this same scenario played out in China? Well, you're in luck because I've got an update and a story here for you. So we've been following basically China's lack of due process, which shouldn't be a fucking surprise. It's a communist nation. But the Beijing News reported this week that a dog breeder in his 30s... Sorry, so let me give you the actual source material. This is the BB News article quoting the Beijing News. I don't know how that works. why don't they just, BBC, just post the Beijing news? Whatever. We're not going to get into that. That's why the media is just fucked. Anyway, the Beijing news, again, BBC article I'm sourcing my material from, but this is reported from the Beijing news. I'm sorry I wasted about 30 seconds of your life on all that. A dog breeder in his 30s, surnamed Ban, I'm assuming it's Ban because I doubt it's Ban, in the eastern Anhui and Hubei province. So he posted last Monday on WeChat, aka Chinese Twitter, that he had two dogs, Chengguan, and that he had two dogs, and they named one of them Chengguan and Xingguan. My Mandarin is horrible. It's probably Cantonese. And apparently, that tweet ends up attracting the attention of the local authorities. So he shows a picture of his two dogs and says, "This is my dog Chengguan and my other dog Xingguan." Actually, I sound pretty good when I speak Mandarin. But Joe, these are just names. Well, names attract controversy because they refer to government and civil workers respectively. And you can't talk shit in China. Again, you don't have a First Amendment right. So what are these things? Well, like Chengguan, I'm assuming that's how you say it. Chengguan. Or is that like Japanese? Or Chengguan. I'm probably in the racist area. Anyway, Chengguan are officials employed in the urban areas to tackle low-level crime. So does that mean they are like glorified hall monitors? Security guards? You've been here for 4 hours. I investigate. Why are you here for 4 hours? Do they investigate people that take shits in the middle of the street? You know, San Francisco could use a Chengguan. Can anyone please define what a low-level crime in a Chinese society is? I mean, they barely have any crime there because no one wants to go to fucking jail without a trial. I mean, maybe they remove trannies from cars and weightlifting competitions. Seriously, I don't know. The Xiguan, I'm assuming that's how you pronounce it. All the X's are sh, like Xi, X-I, Xi Jinping. Xiguan is an informal community workers such as a traffic assistant. So I'm guessing this is a career arc for a criminal justice degree at a Chinese community, at a Chinese community college gets you. And I mean, apparently these are very sensitive subjects. You can't talk about the Chengguan and the Qingguan. This isn't Beijing acting against its own citizens either. For those of you that don't understand the parallel, I'm drawing Beijing, Washington, D.C., same fucking thing, just a different country. This would be the regional province and the local town Mr. Ban would reside in. That's basically attempting to punish him. I mean, you could also say someone in the Politburo saw it, and then just the shit rolls downhill. So in restaurant terms, he's not really being picked on by corporate. This is just a low man on the management totem pole administratively suspending him. I turn my fucking shit down here. Or in other words, 10 days in an administrative detention center, which is fancy Chinese commie speak for jail. So police say Mr. Ban had been increasingly provocative on his WeChat, aka Chinese Twitter, account, and says caused great harm to the nation and the city's urban management in terms of their feelings. Wait, what? Wow! This is a police officer being quoted. They just admitted to locking someone up for 10 days in jail without a trial because this person, Mr. Ban, hurt the local police force's feelings? Is everyone on the left a fucking softie? Now, we're not talking about Americans on the radical left here. We're talking about communists who already exist on the leftist spectrum. This is a slippery slope we're heading down. Look at YouTube, Facebook, Patreon. All these leftist companies are operating under the auspices of capitalism. And speaking of which, you got Google over there basically helping Chinese squash First Amendment rights, which they don't have, but they're basically squashing people's voices. And whenever, a lot of people here in the United States are like, what are you doing, Google? They're like, well, if we don't do this here, they're just going to steal our source code and then use it themselves. So we're just better off, just doing this under the Google name. So at least we can preserve what is ours. I'm going to call bullshit on that and just say Google's preparing to basically start using this stuff when the left allows them to. So anyway, back to what I was saying here. All these leftist companies are operating under the auspices of capitalism, but employing communist-like practices to cleanse the internet of any point of view that deviates from the tech overlord's political agenda. We're not China, and probably won't ever be. Fingers crossed. But all these fucking people on the left that decry America, hate capitalism, and want to throw it out for a system that mirrors what China is doing, well, I got some news for you, you fucks. That society you crave already exists. It's called China. And yet here you are, still in America, and you won't leave. So go fuck yourself. 10 days in jail for talking shit and hurting someone's feelings. Bond claimed he didn't know that was against the law. Public opinion seems to be split. Some say Mr. Bond was looking for trouble. Others voiced his concern under the conditions which the man was detained. Someone wrote on the Chinese Twitter, "Can you tell me which law stipulates that dogs can't be called Chengguan?" That was Nubs. Some were joking Mr. Bond was detained for suspected subversion of state power or revealing state secrets. Apparently some Chinese have a sense of humor implying that Chengguans are actually dogs. I'll be honest with you, Asian humor is very different from the West. So is it safe to say that, there's Black Lives Matter probably doesn't have a Beijing or a Shanghai chapter? I'm just openly wondering. So USA Today reported that on May 4th, a flight from Manchester to Gran Canaria, Spain, I probably said that wrong, a man started yelling and throwing things at the cabin and crew and then attempted to open the door of the plane. Clearly the plane was flying at this time, probably at their cruising altitude. The man was then pinned to the floor by fellow passengers. The airline claimed that the man had a psychotic episode, was banned from the discount airline, and it's now a matter for local police. Well, that's one way to just, rub your, or shake your, or wipe your hands clean of it. Okay, so we got a few things here. I'm sure there's nothing more stressful than watching some dude freak out over the English Channel 30,000 feet in the air in a non-American commercial airline. I get it. But if I'm on this flight and this guy reaches for the door handle, I'm just going to watch this beta male struggle first. It won't go. It's not working. That pause is me passing on what was in my mind, and I'm just going to move on forward here. But Joe, you're putting the whole airplane at risk at the expense of your amusement. False. You see here, folks. There's this thing airplanes do when they go high into the air above 10,000 feet. There's not enough oxygen in the air for your brains to function properly. So they pressurize the cabins so they don't have to provide you with an oxygen mask every time you fly. I couldn't even imagine what it would be like if that was the case. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have to ask you to please put on your oxygen mask. We have now passed the 10,000-foot threshold level. I couldn't even fathom the disgusting nature of that oxygen mask being used by multiple persons in various parts of the country, or internationally, if it's an international flight. Disease would spread. People would die, and Democrats would blame Trump. But I digress. When these airplanes pressurize or depressurize, they expand and contract respectively. So that means when the plane is 30,000 feet in the air, the metal expands ever so slightly, and by design, the fuselage locks the door in place. So it's literally impossible to open the motherfucker mid-flight because the fuselage expands to the point it just can't be pushed open. It's like a fail-safe, if you will. I don't even know if that's the right word, but whatever. So this is what I'm going to do. The beta male's struggling. It's not working. What's going on? So I wait till this asshole's hands are on the handle, and he's too distracted to notice me walking up behind them, and BAM! Choke his ass out. Or if I want to get fancy, I'm going to come up behind him, throw him to the ground, and put him in my new signature move, the tri-strangle. It'll be over in seconds. So I got another airplane story for you. This one's from the Daily Mail. A passenger was kicked off the airplane for a joke. What was that joke? Well, on a Southwest Airlines flight, a passenger was escorted off a plane in San Francisco on Wednesday for joking that water being handed out should be vodka after a lengthy delay on its way to Los Angeles. How does one get so offended by a joke like that? Is she a Chinese citizen? We know she's a Clinton supporter. That's definitely been established. So what we're probably looking at here is a 20-something flight attendant abusing the little power they have been granted. Commie bastards. But being kicked off an airplane for making a bad joke? Geez, I'm glad they don't apply that standard to YouTube, Spreaker, or Mixcloud. Why? Oh, no reason. You guys just ask too many questions. All right, we're plowing ahead here. Moving on to our next segment. What time is it?
It's time to weigh in.
Okay, got some great news. If you have a lot of cash to burn, you happen to own an NFL franchise, not only can you get the state of Florida, which has some of the craziest public record laws, they put stuff on YouTube, folks. If you beat up a cop in front of his dash cam, or pretend to freak out because you think a hitman hired and killed your husband, killed your husband, it's going on YouTube. Or in Bobby Kraft's case, his handjob porn shot with a local sheriff's office, which should be on YouTube, or at least to the public, has been suppressed by a Florida judge. Money talks, and boy does it talk. Money pays, and it buys a shitload of fucking freedom. Wow. So we got a Florida man story here this week. We're going to Martin County, Florida. Martin County Sheriff's Office said that things between 30-year-old Kyle Jamison Jones and his girlfriend escalated when he did not get his way. That sounds vaguely familiar with a lot of kids under 20 or under 30 or 30 and under in this case. Deputies were called to his home by his live-in girlfriend. And I've been really bad about this, so I apologize, but this is being sourced from Fox 32 Chicago, my hometown. They said that Jones's girlfriend told deputies that Jones abruptly woke her by slapping her in the face with a cheeseburger. The victim said that the attack continued as Jones pulled her hair and kicked her down the stairs. Sounds like a great guy. When deputies arrived, the victim reportedly visibly obsessed and covered with particles of the burger. Jones only admitted to deputies that there was a verbal dispute. He refused to say anything about becoming physical with the victim. Why don't they just ask him to produce the cheeseburger? I'm sure the fact that there's burger in her fucking face probably says it all right there. But, I guess she should be grateful that he wasn't eating anything from Chipotle. Can you imagine the force you could generate by swinging a tightly wrapped burrito through the air? And the sound it makes when it hits the skull. That'll never leave your brain. Just like the fucking corn salsa. Or worse, the guy adds guacamole to the burrito. Not only did he just waste $4, now it's in your hair. Next thing you know is you're standing on the street giving your side of the story to the police. The cholo across the way starts yelling, "That's not guacamole!" Ever heard of Klatch coffee? Or, what is it? Elida Geisha Natural? I'll read it to you really quick. The Elida experience is an opportunity to enjoy the world's most expensive coffee, the Elida Geisha Natural, which won first place in the most recent Best of Panama Coffee competition. Klatch roastmaster and green coffee buyer Mike Perry was on the international judging jury and purchased this world record coffee at the auction. So this, you're wondering, is what the fuck kind of coffee is this? They're creating coffee in a laboratory in Costa Rica that claims it's from Ethiopia? I got questions too, but not about that. So you're probably asking yourself, what the hell is this? And how much does it cost? Well, if you would like a pound of this Elida Geisha 803, it's going to cost you $803 for a pound. What? Well, how about just a cup? Well, if you want to walk your ass into Klatch Coffee, the location in Los Angeles or San Francisco, they'll be more than happy to brew it up for you for $75. Yeah, I'll just let that sink in real quick. It was auctioned off to buyers all over the world, most of it going to China, Taiwan, and Japan. I don't know what these Asian folks want with their coffee. I guess it's a big thing over there. Didn't know. Expensive coffee, I mean. It was auctioned off to buyers, and the owner of Klatch says it owns only 10 pounds available in this country. and I went to their website earlier, and it looks like they've already sold out of it. Huh. So are you in the market to be an elitist prick? Maybe you want to show off to your friends how special you are. Perhaps you live in a city where homelessness is an issue and you're stepping over needles and feces outside your $1 million condo on a daily basis. Well, I've got great news. Not only can you feel like a god amongst a bunch of homeless people outside or inside your coffee shop, but you can watch them watch you burn about a week's worth of drugs and groceries and food for most Americans on a cup of coffee. While you sit there in your Clatch Coffee location with the cold fish and salty San Francisco air wafts the floral tea and stone fruit flavors with jasmine, bergamot, and sugarcane, peach, or apricot through the air, past the baristas and the onlookers and the homeless bros attempting to shoot up in the bathroom while pandering to the rich San Fran fucks. That's a lot of money for fucking coffee. Now, I want to sit here and go off on how rich people can just throw away money, but my only thing here I got is that I imagine having the freedom to spend that much money on coffee was probably something similar that people were doing about 115 years ago, maybe 100 years ago even. I imagine enjoying a $75 cup of coffee would probably be the equivalent of eating ice cream in the early 1900s. So a 900-pound man has to be transported to a Virginia court after they cut out his wall. Wow! Ken Hicks pled guilty to cocaine conspiracy on Monday. In March, he appeared via a video link, but requested help to get to court. This is from a Fox News article. I'm going to just jump right to the quote here. The FBI and the U.S. Marshals may determine that it is necessary to open a large hole in the wall of the structure in order to facilitate the use of a device capable of lifting the defendant's weight. What are they going to use, a fucking backhoe? The procedure may also require the removal of the ramp near his doorway and trees on his property. This procedure may require the bracing of the floor and removal of parts of the ceiling structure as well. Just knock the fucking thing down and pull them out of there. The request continued. All steps will be taken to minimize damage and protect the defendant's property. I mean, there's some irony there, because here's a guy who clearly does not give a fuck about himself, but the fucking government's worried about destroying his home. I mean, there's true irony here. According to court papers, the conspiracy to distribute occurred from 2013 to 2017, and if he pleads guilty on Monday, Hicks will be arrested and taken to a secure medical facility, according to the outlet. Again, he's not going to jail. He's going to a medical facility. Medical facility? Has this dope found some loophole in our system? I'd approach this two ways. Number one, I'm going to let him rot in his trailer. He's not going anywhere. I bet his landlord wouldn't object to the government paying his rent. I'm sure there's some Section 8 housing loophole out there. Sure, there's the logistics of hiring a guy to sit outside the fat fuck's trailer and make sure he doesn't go anywhere. But really, how far is that chubbo going to get? He's going to be winded by the time he gets to the door. I mean, can you imagine him trying to make a run for it? All right, let's set the scene here. He's been working out for about a month. You know, the security guard thinks he's just increased his masturbation habits from the vibrations emanating from the trailer. He finally, grows enough balls to, make a run for it. Gets his way up to the door. I'm gonna fucking do this. I'm gonna do this. Kicks the motherfucker open, starts running across his wooden patio ramp, apparently, and almost in the process destroying the ramp in the process. He jumps onto the front lawn like an ice cream truck is dumping ice cream to increase its fuel efficiency. As he's running after his imaginative boxes of ice cream on the street, he notices a fucking bush. Oh shit! Oh fucking bush! And like Free Willy, he leaps over the bush, clipping just a few leaves and sticking the landing, and continues running at full speed like a bowling ball with legs. He's stride for stride, easily moving faster than he's ever moved before. Hey, excuse me, Ken? He's tapped. It's the security guard. Walks up to Ken, who is actually passed out on the ramp of his wooden deck. Wow! Wouldn't that be something? It's just, whole thing is just in his head. Anyway, number 2. Throw him in general population. For those of you not familiar with the verbiage of jail, the big house. He's 900 fucking pounds. It's not like those prison meals are known for their heavy calories. It's not like this guy can call Pizza Hut anymore. Ban him from the cantina, put him in a gang, and he'll be down to 450 in no time. So the obvious question here is, did he put this weight on after he got caught? Or was he one of those distributors that refused to use his own product? Again, these are questions we'd all like the answers to. All right, so this is going to be our main story here. Zoom out quickly. For Joe Weighs In. This kind of fucking pissed me off. I came across this earlier this week and decided to kind of rant about it. So here we go. So Politico and Bleacher Report have Trump derangement syndrome. And if you're wondering why I say that, that's because Politico basically put out an article there. Here, I'll read you what they said, the byline. Trump takes credit for Red Sox turnaround. The Red Sox swept all 3 of their home games over the weekend against the Seattle Mariners, which President Trump took credit for. Okay. Anyone looking for an egregious example of the media looking to sow conflict and discord into our society for the sole purpose of creating profit? Well, I've got a perfect example for you. Politico, a leftist rag on a downslide like Newsweek and Time, which these fucks can go fuck themselves, decides to put out a clickbait article Monday morning decrying President Trump's tweets about taking credit for the Red Sox current 4-game winning streak. Now, that was as of Monday morning. I really haven't checked how they've done because I personally could care less about them. But if they have one more game since, more power to them. I'm going to go with that's not the case. So let's take this story from the beginning. Back in October, when the Red Sox won the World Series, Trump invites the team to the White House, and all the woke African-American players on the Red Sox declined to take the invite. So the media is now pushing forward a racist trope that the not Red Sox are visiting the White House. And trust me, they would have called the Bean Townies the White Sox, but that team already exists in Chicago, and the media doesn't think we're smart enough to understand what they're trying to say. But let's take a step back here. The media is promulgating racist rhetoric and tropes in the form of fresh wokeness, not because they think the Red Sox are a bunch of racists, they just don't like 45. Or my man, Donald Trump. President Donald Trump. But Joe, the media doesn't lean left, and it's very consistent in how they hold sports personalities responsible. What? Oh, really? So the Boston Bruins won the Stanley Cup back in 2011, and our then president, Barack Obama, thought it would be a great idea, because he's a sports fan, to invite the Boston Bruins to the White House. So I'm going to read you an article dated January 24th, 2012. I'm going to kind of skip through most of this, but there's a few, you'll see what I'm talking about here. All right, so Tim Thomas decided to enforce his personal rights to not attend his team's visit Monday to meet Barack Obama at the White House. Oddly enough, what most people seem to have overlooked, Tim Thomas was never invited in the first place. Yup, you heard me. Tim Thomas was never invited. Not only was he not invited this time, I kind of doubt he ever will be invited. To clarify, because Bleacher reports fake news apparently, I'm just kidding. To clarify, the goaltender for the Boston Bruins Stanley Cup winning team of 2011 was invited. Okay, let me get this straight. Now they're trying to tell me that Tim Thomas, or Mookie Betts of the Boston Red Sox, Tim Thomas, the goalie of the Boston Bruins, these two people weren't invited. The team was invited. This was an invitation for the Boston Bruins, and it was their invitation to accept or decline. And then this guy goes on to say, there are a lot of people who believe that if there was a Republican in the White House, perhaps Tim Thomas would not have felt so inclined to make such a strong statement. But that is irrelevant, really, kind of like this fucking article, because to reiterate, Tim Thomas, the individual, and that was all capitalized, was never invited. Tim Thomas, the Boston Bruins goalie, was. Excuse me. So let's reiterate this. Because remember, Now they're saying, "Oh, these players, they have to protest." But Tim Thomas, the individual, was never invited. Tim Thomas, the Boston Bruins goalie, was. Now, if Thomas, now this is where this kind of gets interesting. I was going to skip over this, but this is kind of interesting. Now, if Thomas was a real man, I don't hear them talking about anyone. Anyway, if Tim Thomas was a real man, he would have gone to the Boston Bruins management and ownership and returned the money from his contract and quit the balance of it by retiring so he could exercise his right as a free citizen. So this was about 4 years ago. You can kind of see the seeds of what you see today of people basically saying, he's not following my point of view, sanction him financially. That's basically what this guy is saying. You see, back to the article. You see, I am all for exercising your rights. I am all against abusing them. And Tim Thomas abused those rights. So this guy is taking him saying, look, I don't want to go to the White House for whatever reason. I'm going to read that quote to you in just a second. And is saying now that Tim Thomas is abusing his right. I don't see them saying that about any of these Boston Red Sox players. All right, hold on. Let me go on here because this guy makes some fucking points that just did not age well. He didn't even make any points. He just made a bunch of words on, a server that make no sense. Continuing on here. There are soldiers who fought and died so that Thomas would have the right as a free citizen to freely choose to sign a contract worth millions and millions of dollars with the Boston Bruins. Included in that contract would be his obligations to represent the Boston Bruins in public. Let's read that again one more time. Included in that contract would be his obligations to represent the Boston Bruins in public. One more time, Joe. Included in that contract would be his obligations to represent the Boston Bruins in public. Interesting. Unless I am sadly mistaken, there was no clause there in which stated that Thomas would not have to represent the Boston Bruins if it involved a trip to the White House. I'll read that again. Unless I am sadly mistaken, which you probably are, there was no clause in there which stated that Thomas would not have to represent the Boston Bruins if it involved a trip to the White House. Well, what's kind of interesting, there isn't a clause in there. I don't even know why you're fucking putting that sentence in there to begin with, because that could go either way. Because look at what's going on today. They can make that same argument. This is basically proof that this fucking guy is trying to have it both ways with that last sentence. Oh my God. So the last paragraph of this Bleacher Report article says, because until Tim Thomas gives back that money and retires out of his contract, he is the millionaire Boston Bruin goalie whose responsibility was a public appearance was at the White House and not Tim Thomas, the unpaid rights activist. Again, we're going to read that over. Oh, my mic. Tim Thomas gives back that money and retires out of his contract. He is the millionaire Boston Bruin goalie whose responsibility was a public appearance was at the White House and not Tim Thomas, the unpaid rights activist. That is really funny because they're literally arguing the opposite of that point now. Well, Mookie Betts, there's no clause in his contract that says he has to go to the White House. He doesn't have to make this public appearance. He is an activist. An unpaid rights activist. Ay. So, here, you know what? I wanted to read that, what Tim Thomas said. So here's what we got. In Obama's first term, an NHL player decides to not go to the White House and gets destroyed by the sports media, specifically in this case, Bleacher Report. But he lays out his argument, and that's the quote I wanted to read you guys, which is, so this is what Tim Thomas said. I believe the federal government has grown out of control, threatening the rights, liberties, and property of the people. This is being done at the executive, legislative, and judicial level. This is in direct opposition to the Constitution and the Founding Fathers' vision for the federal government. Because I believe this today, I exercised my right as a free citizen and did not visit the White House. This was not about politics or party, as in my opinion, both parties are responsible for the situation we are in as a country. This is about a choice I had to make as an individual. So you can kind of see why the person who wrote this article was attacking those, the fact that he's an individual, that he, that it's that it's his right as a free citizen. So, I mean, they are doing what basically the Democrats are trying to do to William Barr right now, is use his words to discredit him. And this is insane. This just literally shows you how these leftist sports media mobs are basically acting like a contemporary Stalinist secret service. It's insane. Anyway, Jesus Christ, before I really start going on here. So, he lays out his argument, and he is regarded as someone who is an ungrateful American. The Bruins distanced themselves from the goalie's stance, and he was derided in the media by numerous personalities for throwing an opportunity to take these issues to the person in charge. Really? That's one of the things they used against him, was that he should take this opportunity that was given to him and go talk to the man in charge. Again, not seeing this same rhetoric coming from the left now. Interesting how all of a sudden it changes when their guy's not in the fucking White House. Anyone else eating or seeing this bullshit sandwich a mile of fucking way? I love how the media's attitude towards the president has completely 180'd itself. Before, if you were a Republican and protested a Democrat president, it was still in your best interest to meet the man and tell him how you feel, no matter what. Now, if you're a woke leftist who uses racist rhetoric or uses the president as a way to raise their own shitty national profile, and you deny an invitation to the White House, all of a sudden these invites aren't for the team, but the individual. And instead of being pushed to discuss these issues with the man in charge, as previously stated by the same propagandist media, these woke sports millionaires' egos are stroked by the media like a porn star in a solo video and told, stick it to the man, brother. Don't show up. It's your right to protest. Go fucking fuck yourself, sports media, liberal media. What's going on, Addison? Addison is not a fan of what I had to say. Quiet on the set! So I have to say sometimes. Oh, now I got Wrigley. This is so loaded with contradictions. If you were on the fence about the sports media, or even the media in general leaning left, this should bring you to take the red pill, which it probably won't, and see the media as a borderline propagandist arm of the Democrat Party. The proof is in the pudding. Pudding. The media leans left, and they aren't even trying to hide it anymore. They hold professional athletes who have these platforms to speak out to two different standards, and if you deviate from the overall narrative, you will be buried in shitty press? And we're seeing this with all these growing tech platforms, which we kind of touched on earlier. Facebook is silencing conservative voices. Yeah, sure, they shut down Louis Farrakhan, but I'm suspicious that they even wanted to do that. Joe Rogan and Tim Pool exposed Twitter's left-leaning policies that are obviously aimed at quelling anyone who is a moderate or right of center. Basically, like the Nazis or the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, if you fall out of line with these parties' woke leftist narratives, you're done, son. No soup for you. You got me blacklisted at Hop Sings? He named names. Aye. Then there's YouTube. I gotta tighten this thing real quick. There's YouTube. I don't know what the fuck is going on there. They're deplatforming people for various subjective reasons. They call strikes like a single A rookie ball umpire. Notifications for conservative content or live podcasts seems to have ceased existing, and there's no explanation for it. Used to love watching Rogan live. Haven't seen him live in over a month. And I used to get notifications about Ben Shapiro going live. That's also ceased to exist. Wonder what's going on there. And of course, the people in charge of regulation are too old to grasp the concepts of these tech companies and are too busy raising funds to stay in power to even care. So you have the Congress, the U.S. House of Representatives, even the Senate. They're just all these bunch of old fucks. And, if you got to run for office every 2 years or every 6 and you're still too busy raising money and you're just too old to give a fuck. And we just have to understand that the media, they lean left. They are the enemy of the people, and the more they decry the truth, the more they look like our next Tuesday special, Nancy Pelosi, or another favorite on the Judiciary Committee, Dianne Feinstein. She's a senator out of California. Or there's our Republican Senator Mitch McConnell, or even old man Chuck Grassley. All these people have what is this, 4 people? 1, 2, 3, 4 people have these things in common. They're old, they're out of touch, and they're too entrenched in their cognitive biases to enact change that will save our republic from a cancerous divide. It's unreal how the media literally just treats everyone with 2 different standards. Oh, you're a Republican? Hold on. Let me get out the new standard here. Jesus Christ. Go fuck yourself. All right, Klaus, let's get to the staff report.
In my hand, I hold the staff report.
All right, so this week's staff report is brought to you by my former blog. Well, it still is my blog. I just don't use it anymore. Joe's Sports Corner. It's available at joesportscorner.blogspot.com if you want to check it out. We're going to talk about Babe Ruth and how adversity is his best friend. And you will notice buried back on July 13th, 2012, I wrote an article about that. I'm just going to kind of briefly go over a few parts of it. I'll riff, I'll read, but, don't worry about what is what. So here we go. Did Babe Ruth call his shot? Most people think so. I mean, we're all aware that Babe Ruth was a legend, but this is clearly a myth. It was Game 3 of the 1932 World Series. Cubs starting pitcher Charlie Root was on the bump with a future Hall of Famer Gabby Hartnett behind the plate. Charlie Root struggled in the first inning, giving up a few base hits to the first Yankee hitters. Babe Ruth came up to bat. I believe he batted third, so he was probably the third out, and hit a home run right into center field. Wow, so he had a first bat home run. Jesus Christ. What the fuck? Did Root leave a fastball thigh high? I mean, good God, man. 2 innings later, Lou Gehrig hit a home run, extending the lead 4-1. So the Cubs ended up battling back. They tying the game at 4 runs apiece. An error by Babe Ruth cost the Bronx Bombers their comfortable lead. So the Sultan of Swat's futile attempt at a diving catch gave up a double to Joe Judge, who eventually crossed the plate, tying the game. And this only riled up the crowd further. If anyone has gone to a playoff game in Chicago, everyone knows how just charged that atmosphere is. And then what's interesting is this just shows you how different it is, almost 80 years later, that this riled up the crowd further, and they started throwing fruit and jeers toward Babe Ruth. Fruit. I think I read a few years ago this guy chucked his cell phone at Adam Jones, and they hauled him out of that ballpark so fast, and they probably banned him before they even got to the exit. You just can't fuck around. And then at the top of the 5th inning is where the myth begins. Our aging slugger walks to the plate, competing in his last World Series with his numbers in slow decline. Babe Ruth is now a defensive liability as he just gave up the lead to the Cubs. And the current GOAT of the inning. And again, that phrase isn't used in the way it is now. He was a GOAT. Not the greatest of all time. He was the GOAT. Because he fucked up. So we're going to take this at bat almost pitch by pitch here. So he takes a first strike, and he makes his gesture with one finger. Well, how do you know that, Joe? Because a video came out. And you see the first pitch, and he holds up one finger. The verbal assaults continue from both parties, and strike 2 whizzes right by. A second gesture is made, but this time with 2 fingers. So by this time, the barrage of insults have continued. Cubs players who are in the dugout are now slowly trickling out to jib Babe Ruth, or give him a hard time. Now here's what's kind of interesting. So Wrigley Field's the only difference between Wrigley Field in 1932 and now, well, obviously is the renovations they've done in the last 5 years, but there was no ivy wall back then. There was no brick wall even. That didn't go up till 1937. So if you were at this game and you were where that brick wall would be, you're basically just standing on the field. I think that it was like a rope or something is what kind of said, hey, this is where the field ends. And then if you were on Sheffield or Waveland, what they had done is they had built temporary bleachers just so they could sell more tickets. Can you imagine the Cubs trying to do that now with today's city council or whatever? Hey, we want to shut down Shefflin and Waveland so we can. Actually, they did try to do that, and they said no. So I guess that answers that question. You're not going to do that today. Anyway, so all these guys are slowly trickling out. So back then, the end of the dugout is basically where the owner's box is now. So where Tom Ricketts and all his buddies are sitting are where these 1932 players on the Cubs team were basically standing yelling at Babe Ruth. And so then the next pitch comes. And it was a curveball that was blasted 440 feet out of the ballpark onto a temporary wooden bleachers built on Sheffield Avenue. I wonder if that was the same pitch he hung in the first inning. On Babe Ruth's way around first base, he begins some sort of sit-down motion towards the Cubs bench with his left hand. As he rounds second base, he begins to make another. I mean, he's basically shutting the Cubs up. He's like, fuck you, bitch. I just hit a home run, and you're down a run. Perhaps playfully telling the Cubs players to go back into the dugout. Sit down, you know. As he rounds third, he just trots like he's been there before. Gotta respect that. Now, everyone agrees that Ruth received the brunt of verbal assaults from the Chicago Cubs bench. But instead of ignoring them, Ruth was simply just taunting them through his words and gestures. Now, the nature of this debate is about a home run. It's about what was Ruth gesturing. Was he pointing at the Cubs bench, center field? Maybe he was talking to the Cubs pitcher Charlie Root. All eyewitness accounts and video evidence of that moment remain inconclusive. But I originally wrote this to answer one question. Did Ruth really call his shot? Well, sadly, the answer to this question is just another question. Does it really matter? I mean, it really just comes down to this. The Chicago Cubs, I guess Addison's a White Sox fan. The Chicago Cubs challenged the Bambino, and he responded. And he responded in a big way. All that adversity that surrounded the Sultan of SWAT was knocked out of the park with a baseball that sealed his fate in a mystical land we now call folklore. They say you can measure a lot by a man and the way he responds to adversity. It's the stuff legends are made of. Now, to be honest here about really answering that question, I don't think he called a shot. I think what was going on is Charlie Root pitched and threw him a strike one, and that's what he's saying. That's strike one. Another pitch goes by, strike two. He's just like, that's strike two. He holds up two fingers. They say what's happening now is that, well, how did it go? What I think was going on is Guy Bush, who was the pitcher from the day before, who he was supposed to pitch the next day. I can't really remember. He came out of the dugout and started yelling at Babe Ruth. So they almost think that's kind of what the jawing was. And really the crux to the argument here is that Babe Ruth, after the game, they say the truth is in the moment. And after the game, he never talked about calling his shot. That only kind of started happening as he became a revisionist through the years. The other side of it, too, is Charlie Root, the guy who was pitching, said that if he called his shot the way he explained, he would have just fucking threw the ball right into his head. And if you know professional sports, that's basically how it operates. You don't show up the other guy. I mean, that's why if you throw your bat after a home run in baseball, you kind of get a lot of flack from the other team. You're just not allowed to show up the other person. In every sport, it's different. In football, you can kind of show up the other guy, but if you run the score up on the other team, you're a fucking asshole. In baseball, you're really not allowed to show anyone up. And I don't have an answer for that. I mean, it's always been that way, and that's just the way it's been. It's a good old boys club. God, I really hope I'm not blowing anyone's ears out here. I mean, the truth be told here, though, the called shot was just a way to get the majority of the public to spend 25 cents on a newspaper. After all, it was just a story. And I guess that tells you the fake news movement of our sports media really hasn't changed at all, has it? All right, that's the staff report. Klaus?
We're trying to get a feel for how people spend their day.
The staff reports.
All right, so one more thing here before we go. Earlier this week on Powerful Joe Rogan Experience, my favorite podcast, next to Bill Burr, Joe Rogan had Tulsi Gabbard on, and I just took a few notes on a few things I noticed. So the first 7 to 10 minutes is about how the Republicans are seeking out a war and regime change and using fake intelligence to promulgate a narrative that isn't true, kind of like the Iraq War was a vague attempt at stealing oil reserves in that country, and how John Bolton, who is also on 43's staff, is attempting to do the same thing with Venezuela. So they're trying to go into Iraq and take the oil and kind of go into Venezuela and do the same thing. This is a highly misguided approach to that hot take, if you will. So what's interesting is she fails to acknowledge that this is the same intelligence community that was spying on the Trump campaign, leaking stories about a sitting president, but has no issues with that. That's convenient. And that's also, she's also quoting a, using the whole, it's just funny how she basically fails to mention that the Bush administration was being misled by an intelligence community that had a lot of bad information. She kind of just failed to mention that. But she has no problem questioning the intelligence community findings today. That's very highly intellectually dishonest, because you can't sit there and say, well, 15 years ago, the intelligence agency was right even though they weren't, and then, just blaming the intelligence agencies for part of the reason we went to Iraq, and then turning around in today and saying, like, well, I got no problem with them now. So around the 27-minute mark, they start discussing Eisenhower's last speech to the nation on January 17th, 1961. I suggest you look this one up and listen to it for yourself. They preface the speech as Eisenhower warning the United States that this military-industrial complex is something to be warned against. And then they play the first part of the speech, and it's basically Eisenhower stating that, in my words here, we have to be ready for the war against the smallest of enemies and let them know that it's not a good idea to have a war with the United States. He goes on to say that we got lucky in World War II and the Korean War and shouldn't be improvising the war industry while only in war, that we should be prepared. And then goes on to explain the need for the military-industrial complex. At the end, with roughly 9 minutes left, she mischaracterizes the U.S.-China trade deal by claiming it was Trump that upended talks by imposing tariffs. This is fake news, folks. China's decisions are made by consensus. It's communism. It was reported on the morning this Joe Rogan podcast was recorded that the Chinese Politburo couldn't come to a consensus or agreement and backed out of the trade deal. So she's taken these few things and just totally misrepresented them on one of the biggest. This would be like going on Johnny Carson now and just having a total lopsided point of view here. And I'll be honest, I don't see someone running for president, Tulsi Gabbard. I don't see someone, Tulsi Gabbard, that truly believes she can win the Democrat nomination. What I do see is an Assad shill who endorses Bernie's campaign, is a moderate running as a progressive, and isn't about running for president, but more for creating a national profile and having a larger influence on the party's platform and more muscle within the party. In other words, she's doing what Bernie did back in 2016. All right, so that's going to be the podcast for this week, folks. Thank you so much for listening. Please like our new Ready Set Podcast Facebook page. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Mixcloud, Spreaker, or YouTube. And please post a comment, give the podcast a thumbs up, hit the bell to be notified when the podcast is posted to the channel, and follow us on Twitter at ReadySetPodcast, or email the podcast at ReadySetPodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week, you fucks.
Thanks for listening to the Ready Set Podcast. Check us out next week, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter and look for us on our YouTube channel, Ready Set Podcast.